Jack thought it was just another morning shift, until a wild horse led him to a secret the government tried to bury. Ranger Jack Walker sat at his desk in the Pine Ridge Wilderness Station, sipping coffee as the early morning light filtered through the dusty windows. His shift had just begun when the radio crackled to life, cutting through the quiet of the station. "Ranger Walker, we've got a situation. We need you to check out a report near the southern edge of the wilderness. Something's going on with a wild Mustang herd," the dispatcher said, her voice tight with urgency. "Take a second to subscribe. It really helps." "Thanks." Now back to the story. Jack's hand froze mid-air as he set his coffee mug down, his curiosity piqued. Wild horses were a common sight in the region, but they usually avoided human contact. A herd acting out of the ordinary was rare and troubling. "Got it. I'll head out right now," Jack replied, grabbing his hat and jacket. His boots hit the wooden floor with a firm thud as he rushed to the truck parked outside. The engine roared to life, and the wilderness swallowed him up as he drove toward the southern edge of the Pine Ridge. The terrain became increasingly rugged as he neared the location, the forest thinning to reveal wide, dusty plains. The morning sun beat down, and the heat shimmered off the ground. When Jack finally reached the coordinates, he slowed the truck and stepped out, scanning the landscape for any sign of the herd. He saw nothing at first, but then, in the distance, a flash of chestnut caught his eye. A solitary Mustang stood by a fallen tree, its mane blowing gently in the wind. The horse's eyes were locked on something hidden beneath the tree's massive roots, as if guarding it. Jack's instincts kicked in. The horse wasn't acting like a typical wild Mustang. This one was waiting, almost anticipating something. A chill ran down his spine. Something was wrong. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, and Jack knew the day ahead would be anything but ordinary. Jack approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the dry earth as he made his way toward the lone Mustang. The horse, a striking chestnut with a coat that gleamed in the sun, stood stock still, its amber eyes unwavering as they fixed on the fallen tree. The Mustang's muscles were tense, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Jack paused, watching the animal for any sign of aggression. But the horse made no move to flee or challenge him. Instead, it simply stared. He knew better than to approach a wild horse too quickly. Slowly, he knelt a few feet away from the animal, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. The Mustang's gaze followed him, but it didn't seem alarmed. Instead, Jack sensed an unusual connection, something deeper than the typical mistrust between wild animals and humans. For a long moment, neither Jack nor the horse moved. The wind rustled the sagebrush, and the distant call of a hawk echoed through the quiet valley. The Mustang's ears twitched at every sound, yet remained rooted in place. Jack's mind raced with questions. What was it about this spot that held the horse's attention so intensely? And why did it stay so close to the fallen tree? He stood and moved cautiously around the tree, scanning the area. His eyes darted over the broken branches, the tangle of roots. At first, he saw nothing out of the ordinary. But then, a faint rustle of movement came from beneath the tree. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to stir Jack's instincts. Something was hidden there, something the Mustang was waiting for. Jack glanced back at the horse, whose gaze had not wavered. There was an understanding between them now. This was no ordinary wild animal, and this was no ordinary moment. Whatever lay buried beneath the tree, it had drawn them both here at this exact time. And Jack knew that uncovering the truth would change everything. The fallen tree lay sprawled across the ground like a giant's relic, its roots twisting up from the earth as if trying to claw their way back into the soil. It was massive, with gnarled branches that had once reached toward the sky, now lying in disarray, scattered across the dusty floor of the wilderness. Jack walked closer, careful not to disturb the Mustang's vigil. The horse hadn't moved, its eyes still locked on the fallen tree as if guarding a secret. Jack's gaze shifted to the roots of the tree, where the earth had been disturbed. It wasn't just a typical fall. Something had clearly caused the tree to topple in a way that suggested recent activity. The ground around it was scuffed, the soil scattered as if something had been dragged beneath its weight. Jack crouched, running his fingers through the dirt, searching for any clues. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, and the heat of the day was beginning to press down. Sweat beaded on Jack's brow as he surveyed the scene. Whatever lay beneath the roots, it wasn't just nature at work. He reached for his shovel, strapped to the side of his pack, and began to dig carefully around the base of the tree. His movements were slow, deliberate, each scoop of earth revealing more of what had been hidden. The earth shifted as he pried free a large, jagged rock that had been wedged under the tree's roots. Beneath it, the ground seemed hollow, as if something or someone had been trapped there for some time. A chill ran down his spine. The air around him felt heavier, charged with an energy that made his senses sharpen. He hesitated for a moment, then reached deeper, fingers brushing against something smooth and cold. His heart skipped a beat as he pulled free a weathered metal box, the edges rusted with age. The markings on it were faint but unmistakable, military symbols. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a tree and some dirt. This was something far bigger than he had anticipated. Jack sat back on his heels, staring at the metal box he had just unearthed. The surface was scarred with rust, but the symbols were clear enough, a faded military insignia etched into the side. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it, wondering how it had ended up buried here deep in the Nevada wilderness. The more he thought about it, the more the situation felt wrong. Wild horses didn't protect random objects. Blaze, the Mustang, had known something was here, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was no accident. He ran his fingers over the edges of the box, looking for any kind of opening. There was a latch, but it was sealed tight, covered in dirt and grime. Jack's curiosity only deepened, but the weight of the moment made him cautious. Something about this felt far too deliberate. Blaze shifted his weight beside him, his amber eyes never leaving Jack's face. The Mustang seemed to be waiting, his expression almost knowing. Jack glanced back at the horse, trying to figure out what it was the animal sensed that he hadn't. It was as if the Mustang had some connection to this place, to whatever had been hidden here, and Jack was starting to wonder if he was just a part of something far larger than a simple ranger's investigation. His hand hovered over the box, but before he could pry it open, a sudden rustling caught his attention. A sharp breeze cut through the trees, and the stillness of the wilderness was pierced by the distant call of a hawk. Jack paused, his senses on high alert. Something wasn't right. The wilderness around him seemed too quiet, too still. No birds, no small animals rustling through the brush. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. Jack stood, scanning the area, his mind racing. Was someone else aware of this place? And if so, how much did they know? He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he worked the latch on the rusted box, finally prying it open with a sharp click. The air around him felt thick, charged with the sense of discovery. Inside, layers of dust and grime clung to a stack of yellowed papers. He carefully lifted them, unfolding the fragile edges, revealing maps, blueprints, and what appeared to be confidential documents stamped with top secret. His breath caught in his throat as he scanned the pages. They were filled with technical jargon and coordinates, and there were references to something called Project Mustang. The project seemed to be a military operation, hidden deep within the wilderness. The document spoke of testing, experimentation, and something called biological adaptation for survival. Jack's pulse quickened. The Mustang, Blaze, seemed to be connected to this. But how? As he flipped through more of the papers, Jack found detailed notes about the wild horse population in the area, the Ruby Mountain herd in particular. The document spoke of an initiative to modify the genetics of these horses to withstand the harsh conditions of the desert, to adapt to extreme temperatures, and to be stronger, faster, more resilient. The words jumped off the page. Scientists have been experimenting on wild Mustangs, tampering with nature for some purpose. Suddenly, Jack's mind raced. Blaze, the Mustang who had been guarding the fallen tree, was more than just a wild horse. He was part of something much larger, a product of a government experiment that had long been abandoned. But why had the military left behind these records and materials? And Why had Blaze stayed near the tree, as if waiting for something? A new unease settled over him as he realized how little he knew about what was unfolding. The box, the military operation, Blaze's behavior, it all pointed to something hidden, something dangerous. Jack looked back at the Mustang, who stood still, watching him with those steady amber eyes. Jack knew then that uncovering this secret would reveal far more than he ever expected. The truth was just beginning to surface, and it was more complicated than he could have ever imagined. As Jack sifted through the stack of papers, one document caught his eye. It was a small, faded photograph, tucked between the pages like an afterthought. Jack's fingers hesitated before lifting it. His curiosity piqued. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. 3 men in military fatigues, standing in front of structure that looked like an old research facility. What stood out was the object they were gathered around. It was metallic, almost cylindrical, with a series of intricate gears and what looked like an electrical core. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. The photo was labeled with a simple caption, Test Unit Alpha, Field Adaptation. Beneath that, in smaller letters, was a cryptic reference to Phase 2, Mustang integration. Jack's heart raced. The object in the photo seemed out of place in the wilderness, and the term Mustang integration sent a chill through him. What exactly had they been testing? What was this mysterious device, and how did it fit into the broader experiment? He carefully examined the photo again, noticing that the background was a remote part of the wilderness, not far from where he stood. The structure in the photo looked abandoned, but the object was clearly being operated, which raised more questions than answers. Why had the military left so many clues behind? And more importantly, what had happened to the project? Jack reached for the box again, his mind racing. He noticed something inside the box that had previously escaped his attention, a small, cylindrical piece of equipment wrapped in fabric. He pulled it out cautiously, revealing a strange, compact device. It looked like a transmitter, but it was unlike any communication tool Jack had seen before. The surface was smooth, with glowing symbols etched into it, as though it had been crafted for a specific purpose, perhaps a task far beyond his understanding. As Jack held the device in his hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary piece of technology. This was part of something much larger, something still active. He glanced back at Blaze, the Mustang. Could this device be tied to the horse in some way? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but they left him with more questions than answers. Jack stared at the device in his hands, its smooth surface warm beneath his fingers. The glowing symbols were faint, almost like they were waiting to be activated. But it was the Mustang, Blaze, that occupied his thoughts. Blaze had been guarding the tree, had been present when Jack first arrived, and had stayed close as he unearthed the box and discovered the hidden documents. The horse wasn't just a passive observer. He seemed to be a key player in this unfolding mystery. Jack's gaze drifted to Blaze, who stood motionless, his amber eyes fixed on the scene in front of him. For a moment, it was as if the horse was aware of Jack's thoughts, and Jack couldn't help but wonder what role Blaze played in all of this. Was the Mustang connected to the project in some way? The idea gnawed at him, a thread of suspicion and curiosity intertwined. The horse had to know something, perhaps even more than Jack. Blaze was no ordinary wild horse. Jack had seen dozens of Mustangs during his time as a ranger, but none had displayed the kind of intelligence and awareness that Blaze exhibited. There was something about the way the horse had positioned himself near the fallen tree, something deliberate, as if he had been waiting for the right moment. It wasn't just instinct. It was as though Blaze had been trained to respond to a specific trigger, to protect or to guide. The connection between the two of them, Jack and Blaze, felt undeniable, as if the Mustang had chosen him for a reason. But what was that reason? Was it the device? Was it the documents that connected the horse to the secret project? Blaze suddenly snorted, breaking Jack from his thoughts. The Mustang took a few steps forward, his gaze never leaving the tree, then looked back at Jack as if urging him to follow. There was an undeniable sense of urgency in his actions. Jack stood, a strange feeling settling over him. The time for questions was over. Blaze was showing him the way, and Jack had no choice but to follow. The Mustang was leading him into a deeper mystery, one that tied the animal's fate to a dark chapter of history. Jack followed Blaze, his mind racing with thoughts of what the Mustang might know and what he might be leading him toward. The horse's pace was steady, purposeful, as if he understood the urgency of the moment. Jack couldn't help but feel that the path ahead would reveal more than just the truth behind the abandoned project. It would unlock something about Blaze's very existence, something that had been hidden for far too long. Blaze stopped in front of a small, weathered structure nestled at the base of a rocky outcrop. It was nearly invisible from a distance, overgrown with weeds and ivy, but it looked like an old military outpost, a relic of something long forgotten. Jack's breath caught as he realized this was the place from the photograph, the structure in the photo that had shown the strange metallic object. The symbols on the building were similar to the ones on the device he'd found earlier. This was where the project had taken place, and Blaze had brought him here. The Mustang turned toward the entrance, his ears pricked forward, his eyes scanning the area as if he knew exactly what Jack needed to find. Jack stepped closer, the dry ground crunching beneath his boots. The door was cracked open, as if waiting for them to enter. As he pushed it open, the air inside smelled of decay, must, and old metal. It was eerily quiet, save for the distant wind that whistled through the cracks in the walls. Inside, the shadows stretched long, and Jack's flashlight beam danced across the dusty floors. The space was filled with remnants of the past, broken equipment, papers scattered haphazardly, and remnants of machinery that seemed to have been abandoned in a rush. But it wasn't just the physical remnants that caught Jack's attention. It was the walls. There, etched into the walls in a faded, almost hidden script, were more of the symbols, along with a series of numbers and coordinates. Jack's pulse quickened as he leaned closer, deciphering the message that had been left behind. It was a set of instructions, a plan for the final phase of the Mustang project, a phase that had never been completed. The realization hit Jack like a wave. This wasn't just about a genetic experiment. It was about something far more dangerous. And Blaze, the Mustang, was at the center of it all. Jack studied the symbols on the wall, the cryptic message seeming to pulse with meaning as his flashlight traced the lines. His heart raced as the realization hit him. This wasn't just random, forgotten writing. This was part of the project, the hidden piece of the puzzle. The numbers and coordinates were too precise to be coincidence. They were a map, a direction, a clue to the next phase of this long-abandoned military operation. He took out the map from the metal box he had unearthed earlier and spread it out on the floor, the paper crackling under his hands. The coordinates from a wall matched those on the map, and his fingers traced the path to a secluded section of the wilderness he hadn't explored in years. The area was marked with a small, almost unnoticeable X. Jack's pulse quickened. It was a remote, desolate part of the desert, a place where few ventured. Whatever lay there had been intentionally hidden, buried under layers of time, just waiting to be found. Blaze stepped forward, his hooves silent on the cracked floor, as if drawn to the map. The Mustang sniffed at the edges, then turned his head to look back at Jack, his amber eyes wide, filled with something Jack couldn't quite place. Something that made Jack feel like the horse knew more than he let on. Jack stood, rolling up the map with careful precision, his mind focused on the destination marked by the X. He had no choice now but to follow the path laid out before him. The connection between Blaze and this strange, secretive operation was growing clearer by the minute. The Mustang wasn't just a wild horse. It was a living link to something dangerous, something no one had fully understood. The air in the outpost felt heavier now, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for Jack to make the next move. Blaze, ever the silent companion, seemed to be urging him on. With one final glance at the etched symbols, Jack knew what he had to do. The next step was clear. They had to reach that hidden location, the one marked on the map. And whatever secrets it held, he would uncover them. Jack and Blaze made their way back to the truck, the weight of the map and the newly discovered coordinates pressing heavily on Jack's mind. As he loaded the map into the glove compartment and climbed into the driver's seat, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The air around him seemed thicker, as if the very wilderness was alive with anticipation. But it wasn't just the eerie quiet that unsettled him. It was the sense that the secrets he was uncovering were not his alone to uncover. Blaze, always alert, stood beside the truck, his gaze never leaving the road ahead. Jack knew the Mustang was more than just a guide. He was a key player in a larger mystery. But as Jack prepared to start the engine, a familiar voice called out from behind him. "Thought I'd find you here." Jack turned, startled. Standing at the edge of the clearing, in full ranger gear, was Ellen Hart, the local historian who had been working with Jack on research regarding the Ruby Mountain herd. She had an uncanny knack for knowing when Jack needed help, and it seemed she'd come at just the right time. "You're a bit early," Jack said with a raised eyebrow. "I was planning to head out alone." Ellen shrugged, her expression calm yet determined. "You and I both know that this isn't something you can handle by yourself, Jack. Besides, I've been tracking the herd for years. Whatever you're after, it involves me now." Jack hesitated. He had always prided himself on working alone, but there was something about Ellen that he trusted, something more than her knowledge of the area. She had a way of seeing beyond the surface, of reading the land in a way that few could. Blaze nudged Jack's side, as though urging him to accept the help. Jack looked at the Mustang, then back at Ellen, the pieces falling into place. With a reluctant nod, he stepped out of the truck and motioned for her to join him. "We leave now," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with unspoken resolve. Together, they would follow the trail, unravel the mystery, and face whatever dangers lay ahead. They had an unlikely ally in Blaze, but now they had each other too, and that made all the difference. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as Jack, Ellen, and Blaze set off into the wilderness. The road quickly gave way to rugged terrain, the path narrowing as they moved deeper into the mountains. The truck was left behind, parked at the edge of the forest, and now they were on foot. Every step took them further from civilization, deeper into a world untouched and unforgiving. Ellen led the way, her eyes scanning the landscape with practiced ease. Jack followed close behind, his mind focused on the coordinates, knowing the secret he sought was somewhere ahead. Blaze, ever the silent companion, walked alongside them, his steady gait betraying nothing of the extraordinary journey ahead. The terrain grew steeper and the air thinner. Jagged rocks jutted from the ground, and thick underbrush blocked their path, forcing them to hack their way through. The further they went, the more tense the atmosphere became. It wasn't just the wilderness that weighed on them. It was the feeling that they were being watched. "I've been out here countless times, but this place, it feels different now," Ellen said, her voice low, almost a whisper. She was right. There was an unease in the air, a quiet that seemed to press in on all sides. Even the birds had gone silent. Jack scanned the area, his instincts kicking in. "We're getting close." Blaze suddenly stopped, his ears flicking, eyes scanning the tree line. The Mustang was on edge, sensing something that Jack couldn't yet identify. "What is it?" Ellen asked, looking at the horse. Her question was met with a low snort from Blaze, his nostrils flaring as he pawed at the ground. Jack felt the tension in the air spike, a chill crawling down his spine. "I don't know, but I don't think we're alone," Jack replied, his hand instinctively resting on the rifle slung across his back. Suddenly, a rustling from the nearby trees broke the silence. Something, or someone, was out there, hidden in the shadows. Jack's heart pounded as he motioned for Ellen to stay close. The journey ahead had just taken a dangerous turn. Whatever they were about to face, it wasn't just the wilderness anymore. They were not alone. Blaze's muscles tensed as he stood motionless, his head held high, ears swiveling toward the sound of movement in the trees. Jack's hand hovered near the rifle, his pulse quickening. Ellen, sensing the change in the atmosphere, stood still beside him, her eyes scanning the darkening forest. The rustling stopped, but the silence that followed felt heavier, more oppressive. Blaze snorted, his nostrils flaring, and took a cautious step forward. His eyes remained fixed on the trees ahead, unwavering, as if he was reading the very air around him. Jack knew that Blaze had an instinct for danger, one honed by years of living in the wild. But this behavior, it was different. The Mustang wasn't just on alert. He was almost protective. Jack exchanged a quick glance with Ellen. "He knows something we don't," he muttered. "Whatever's out there, Blaze feels it." Ellen nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's never acted like this before, has he?" Jack shook his head. "No, he's been quiet, watchful, but not like this." Blaze had always been calm and independent, even when the herd was spooked by storms or predators. But now, the horse seemed to sense a threat, one that neither Jack nor Ellen could identify. Blaze moved a few steps ahead, his gait slow but deliberate. He seemed to be pulling them toward something, his body language insisting they follow. Jack hesitated for a moment, torn between caution and the need to understand what Blaze was trying to show them. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he nodded to Ellen. "Let's move." They followed Blaze through the thickening trees, the path growing steeper with each step. The light from the fading sun barely pierced the canopy above, casting long shadows across the ground. As they pressed on, Jack felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Every sense was alert. Whatever Blaze was leading them toward, it wasn't something they had prepared for. Blaze stopped suddenly, his body tense, his eyes locked on something ahead. Jack and Ellen froze, their breaths catching. There, just beyond the clearing, a shadow shifted between the trees. Something or someone was watching them. The Mustang's behavior spoke louder than words. Danger was closer than they realized. The air grew colder as Jack, Ellen, and Blaze stepped cautiously into the clearing. The last traces of daylight were slipping away, leaving only the eerie glow of twilight filtering through the trees. Blaze's eyes were locked on the shadowed figure ahead, his muscles coiled with tension. Jack felt his heartbeat quicken, his instincts screaming that they weren't alone. "Stay close," Jack murmured, his voice barely audible. He moved cautiously forward, his hands still on the rifle, but his eyes fixed on the figure ahead. At first, the shadow didn't move, but as they neared, it slowly became more defined. A person standing still among the trees. A man, dressed in rugged, faded military gear, his face obscured by a weathered cap. The man's posture was tense, as though he had been waiting for them. Ellen stopped behind Jack, her hand instinctively gripping her pack strap. "Who is that?" she whispered. "I don't know," Jack replied, his voice tight. "But he's not here by accident." The man's gaze shifted from Blaze to Jack, his eyes wary but not immediately hostile. He didn't seem surprised to see them, as if he had expected their arrival. "I'm not here to cause trouble," the man said, his voice rough, as if unused to speaking. "But I've been watching you." Jack's grip on his rifle tightened, though he made no move to raise it. The man's words unsettled him more than they should have. "Watching them? For how long? What do you want?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man hesitated, then took a slow step forward. "I know what you're looking for, and you're not going to find it alone. Not without help." Jack exchanged a glance with Ellen. Neither of them had expected an encounter like this. The man's presence felt too deliberate, his knowledge of their mission too exact. He wasn't a random wanderer. He was part of something deeper, something Jack had yet to fully understand. "Who are you?" Jack pressed. The man studied them for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he said simply, "I'm someone who's been through this before, and I can help you find the answers. But it's going to cost you." The man, whose presence had only deepened the mystery, led Jack, Ellen, and Blaze through the dense trees, his steps purposeful and measured. They followed in silence, the air heavy with uncertainty. The forest around them thickened as they moved further into the wilderness, the path narrowing until it seemed to disappear entirely beneath the heavy growth. Jack's unease grew with each step. This wasn't a trail that had seen human footfalls in years, maybe decades. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a secluded valley, the landscape opening up into a breathtaking scene. The land here was untouched, wild, perfectly preserved, as if it had been hiding from the outside world. The valley stretched out before them, framed by towering cliffs on all sides. A small stream wound its way through the middle, its waters clear and cold, reflecting the dimming sky above. The man stopped at the edge of the valley and turned to face them. "This is where it all began," he said, his voice soft but laden with gravity. Jack surveyed the area. The valley was untouched by time, a perfect sanctuary, yet it held an unsettling stillness. It felt as though the land itself was holding its breath. Blaze, who had remained silent and watchful, now stepped forward, his eyes scanning the landscape with more than simple curiosity. "What is this place?" Ellen asked, her voice hushed as she took in the surroundings. There was something ancient about it, as if it had been waiting for them. "This is where they brought the horses," the man replied, his gaze distant. "Where Project Mustang was supposed to thrive. They thought they could change the horses, make them something more. But this valley," his voice trailed off, his eyes narrowing as if haunted by the memory. "This place didn't forget." Jack's pulse quickened. It was here, this hidden valley, that the project had been initiated, where the experiments had begun. It was no coincidence that Blaze had led them here. The Mustang was connected to this place, just as the valley seemed to be waiting for them. There were answers here, buried in the land, and Jack could feel them calling to him. "This is the beginning of the end," the man said, breaking the silence. "But only if you're ready to face what comes next." The air in the hidden valley seemed to thicken with the weight of unspoken truths as Jack, Ellen, and the mysterious man stood at the edge of the stream. Blaze moved slowly through the grass, his hooves making barely a sound as he circled the valley, as though he had some understanding of the land that neither Jack nor Ellen could grasp. "Tell us what happened here," Jack demanded, his voice firm. "What is the real story behind Project Mustang? And what does Blaze have to do with it?" The man, who had yet to give his name, turned toward them, his expression weary, almost resigned. He seemed to have anticipated this question for years, the weight of the answer already burdening him. He took a deep breath, glancing out over the valley as though the landscape itself held the key. "They never told you, did they?" the man said softly. "About the second phase of the project, about what they were really trying to accomplish." Jack stepped closer. "Tell us." The man's gaze flickered to Blaze, who had stopped, his head slightly lowered, as if listening. "They wanted to create the perfect creature," the man continued, his voice tight with emotion. "Something stronger, more adaptable than anything nature could create. They used the Mustang herd as the foundation, genetically altering their DNA to withstand the harshest conditions. But they didn't just want survival. They wanted control." Ellen's breath caught as she realized the depth of the project. Control over the horses? Over their instincts? More than that, the man said. They wanted the horses to serve as tools, biologically enhanced creatures capable of executing military operations in hostile environments. But there were unintended consequences. Some of the genetic modifications led to abnormalities, unpredictable traits. Blaze, for example, was part of the first successful test. He's not just any Mustang. He's different. Jack's heart raced as the man's words sank in. Blaze wasn't just a wild horse. He was a product of something darker, something far more dangerous. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Blaze had been genetically modified, but he had also survived, adapted. He was the last proof of the project's existence. So, what happened to the others? Jack asked. The man's gaze hardened. They were abandoned, left to roam, forgotten by those who created them. But some of them, they're still out there. And they're not alone. The revelation hung in the air like a thick fog, and Jack couldn't shake the weight of the man's words. Blaze wasn't just a wild Mustang. He was the result of an experiment that sought to bend nature to its will. Jack looked at the horse, his chestnut coat glistening under the fading sun, his eyes bright and intelligent, far too aware of the world around him. Blaze wasn't the first, the man continued, his voice grim. But he was the only one who survived the initial trials. The project was supposed to create a herd of super Mustangs, resilient, almost unstoppable. But nature has a way of pushing back against such interference. He glanced at Blaze, who had now turned his head toward them, his gaze steady and piercing. Jack's mind raced, trying to process the enormity of the situation. So Blaze, he's the last of his kind? The last successful test subject? The man nodded slowly, his eyes distant. Yes, but not in the way you might think. Blaze was meant to be a tool, a weapon. But somewhere along the way, he developed something none of them expected: awareness, intelligence, emotion. The modifications didn't just make him stronger, they made him more attuned to his surroundings, to the people he interacted with. He's more than just a modified Mustang. He's a symbol of what the project should have been and what it never could be. Jack swallowed hard, his thoughts returning to Blaze's behavior. The way the Mustang had protected him, the way he'd led them to the hidden valley, as though he knew the answers before Jack did. The connection between them wasn't just instinctive. Blaze had been part of something much larger, and yet, against all odds, he had survived. Does he know what he is? Ellen asked, her voice quiet. The man shook his head. Not in the way you and I do. But Blaze understands more than you think. He's the bridge between the past and the future of this project. And as much as he's been a part of it, he's also its greatest survivor. He's the key to understanding everything. Jack looked at Blaze, the Mustang's amber eyes meeting his, and for the first time he understood. Blaze wasn't just a witness to the past. He was the last hope to unlock its full truth. As the sun dipped lower behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the valley, a sudden chill filled the air. Blaze's ears flicked back, and the hair on the back of Jack's neck stood up. Something was wrong. The sense of being watched, of an unseen presence lurking in the wilderness, was growing stronger. We're not alone, Jack muttered, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle slung over his shoulder. Ellen looked around nervously, her eyes scanning the surrounding trees and rock formations. What do you mean? I don't see anything. Blaze's behavior spoke louder than any words could. The Mustang's muscles were tensed, his eyes wide and alert. He snorted softly, his gaze fixed on the tree line to their left. Jack took a slow, measured step forward, his senses heightened, every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig setting his nerves on edge. Something was closing in. There's something out there, Jack said, his voice steady but urgent. Blaze feels it. Before Ellen could respond, there was a sudden rustle from behind them. Jack whirled around, heart hammering in his chest, but it was too late. Out of the shadows, something large and fast exploded into view, something not entirely natural. The creature was massive, its body hulking and disfigured. Its eyes glowed a pale, unnatural yellow, and it moved with terrifying speed. Jack barely had time to register the creature's grotesque features. Muscle mass too thick for any normal wild animal, teeth unnaturally sharp, as it lunged forward, straight at Blaze. Blaze bolted, his legs stretching out in a burst of speed, but the creature was relentless. It was after him, its growl a deep, bone-chilling sound that echoed through the valley. Jack instinctively raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the creature was upon Blaze, snapping at the Mustang's flank. "No!" Jack shouted, his voice cracking with panic. In a flash of movement, Blaze kicked out, catching the creature with his hooves. The beast staggered back, momentarily disoriented, but its glowing eyes were locked on Blaze once more. Jack could feel the weight of the moment. This was no ordinary predator. This was something created, something born from the very project that had altered Blaze's fate. The hidden threat had revealed itself, and now it was clear. Blaze wasn't the only survivor of the project. The creature snarled, its yellow eyes fixed on Blaze as the Mustang sidestepped, his hooves kicking up dust in the twilight air. Jack's mind raced. This wasn't a typical predator. It moved with an unnatural speed and strength, more like a machine than an animal. The mutation was clear, the result of whatever twisted science had given birth to these creatures. It was a product of the same experiments that had shaped Blaze. Blaze's muscles were taut, every instinct screaming for him to fight or flee. The Mustang, though, stood his ground, his amber eyes never leaving the creatures, as if he knew what was at stake. Jack had to act quickly. He couldn't let Blaze face this thing alone. "Get back," Jack shouted, his voice cutting through the tension, but the words barely had time to settle in the air before the creature lunged again. Its claws raked the ground, its jaws snapping in a deadly arc toward Blaze. In a blur of motion, Jack raised his rifle and fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the valley, but the creature was fast, too fast. It twisted in midair, avoiding the bullet by mere inches. Jack cursed under his breath and aimed again, but the beast was already closing in, its claws scraping the ground as it sprang toward Blaze. The Mustang reacted with a ferocity Jack had never seen before. In one swift motion, Blaze twisted, launching a powerful kick that sent the creature tumbling back. It wasn't enough to defeat it, but it gave Jack a crucial moment. With his rifle now aimed at the creature's head, Jack took a deep breath and fired again. This time, the shot found its mark. The creature's body jerked violently as the bullet struck, and it let out a high-pitched shriek before collapsing to the ground, its limbs twitching in a final, desperate spasm. Silence followed, heavy and unnerving. Blaze stood over the fallen creature, his sides heaving with exertion. Jack lowered his rifle, his heart still pounding. The last survivor of the experiments, Blaze, had proven himself once again. But as Jack looked at the lifeless creature, a cold realization washed over him. Blaze wasn't the only one. There were more of these things out there, and they would stop at nothing to hunt him down. The fight for survival had just begun. The stillness of the valley was shattered by the sound of distant growling. Jack's pulse spiked as he scanned the darkening landscape, his eyes darting from the fallen creature to Blaze, who was standing guard, eyes fixed on the treeline. The beast had been taken down, but it wasn't alone. Jack knew there were more out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance. Ellen, her face pale but resolute, moved to Jack's side. "We can't stay here. If there are more of those things, we need to get to safety." Jack nodded, but his eyes never left Blaze, who was still on high alert. The Mustang's tail flicked nervously, and he pawed the ground, a clear signal that something was approaching. Jack's grip tightened on his rifle, ready for whatever was coming. Without warning, another creature emerged from the trees, its massive form moving silently through the underbrush. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, its body a hulking mass of muscle and sinew. It was bigger than the first, its movements calculated and deliberate. Jack's gut twisted with recognition. It wasn't just a predator. It was a soldier bred for war. The creature bared its teeth, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just an animal. It was a weapon, a mistake of science gone horribly wrong. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired, the shot ringing out with deafening clarity. The creature snarled, taking the hit but not faltering. It charged, its movements impossibly fast. Blaze reacted instantly, launching himself forward, his powerful legs kicking up dirt as he charged the creature with a force Jack hadn't expected. The two collided in a flurry of hooves and claws, Blaze rearing back and striking with his front legs. The creature snarled, slashing at Blaze's flank with razor-sharp claws. "Blaze!" Jack shouted, running toward the fight. He aimed his rifle, but the two beasts were moving too quickly, too violently. Blaze took another hit, his body twisting as he evaded the creature's claws, but Jack could see it. The Mustang was tiring. The battle was becoming more than just survival. It was about breaking the cycle that had brought these monsters into existence. Jack gritted his teeth. The creature wasn't going to get Blaze. Not today. He took aim again, heart pounding, and fired, knowing that this moment would decide everything. The creature fell to the ground with a heavy thud, its body twitching for a moment before going still. Jack's heart raced as he lowered his rifle, his eyes fixed on Blaze. The Mustang was breathing heavily, blood trickling from a gash on his side, but he was standing tall, his expression resolute. Jack approached carefully, his gaze never leaving the creature's lifeless form. Blaze had won, again, but there was no time for celebration. More of these things were out there, and Jack knew that the answers he sought were just beyond reach. He had to find out who, or what, was behind the project that had created these horrors. The sound of footsteps on the gravel behind him made Jack turn sharply. Ellen, her face drawn with concern, approached cautiously. Her eyes flicked from a fallen creature to Blaze. "Is he all right?" Jack nodded, his voice tight. "He'll be fine, but we've got bigger problems." Blaze trotted over to the fallen creature, sniffing it cautiously before stepping back. Jack turned toward the man who had led them into the valley, the mysterious soldier who had been watching them. He was standing a few feet away, his face unreadable, his posture tense. "You know what these things are," Jack said, his tone hard. "Tell me everything." The soldier's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, Jack saw a flash of guilt in his gaze. He took a deep breath and finally spoke, his voice heavy with regret. "I was part of the original team that ran the project. Project Mustang. I didn't know what it would become. At first, we thought we were just trying to create stronger, more resilient horses for the military. But they pushed too far. They started making modifications to the genetics, human and animal DNA, merged in ways that weren't meant to be." Jack's stomach churned as the soldier continued. "The creatures you've been fighting are the result of that. Failed experiments. Some survived the modifications, but others became something else entirely. Something monstrous." The man's eyes met Jack's. "And Blaze, he's the only one left, the only success. But even he wasn't meant to survive." A cold weight settled over Jack. Blaze wasn't just a survivor. He was the last of a twisted experiment, the final remnant of a military project gone horribly wrong. Jack felt the weight of the soldier's words settle over him like a suffocating blanket. The truth was worse than he had imagined. Blaze, the Mustang he had trusted, wasn't just a survivor of a failed experiment. He was the product of a monstrous program that had twisted nature to its breaking point. And yet, Blaze had outlived all the others, standing as the final testament to the project's twisted ambitions. But as Jack looked at the Mustang, still standing proud despite the gash on his side, a gnawing unease crept into his chest. Blaze had survived, but at what cost? What had those genetic modifications truly done to him? And could the horse ever truly be free from the project that had created him? The soldier's gaze hardened as he met Jack's eyes, as if reading the thoughts racing through his mind. "You don't understand," the soldier said, his voice low. "The project wasn't just about survival. It was about control, about breeding animals to be more than animals. They wanted the ultimate weapon. They wanted the horses to be the soldiers, capable of carrying out missions with precision, without hesitation." Jack took a step back, his mind racing. And Blaze? He was the first successful test, the soldier continued, his face darkening with the weight of his own guilt. But the modifications, they were too much. Blaze started showing signs of intelligence, of independence. That's why they abandoned him. They couldn't control him. But he's not the only one. A sick feeling twisted in Jack's stomach. There were more. "Where are they?" Jack demanded, his voice sharp. "Where are the others?" The soldier hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the edge of the valley, where the shadows seemed to stretch longer with each passing minute. They were meant to be contained, but when the project was shut down, they escaped, and they've been hunting ever since. The ones that survived, they're not just animals anymore. There's something else, and they're coming for Blaze. Jack felt the ground shift beneath him. A sense of urgency flooded him. The nightmare was far from over. It was only just beginning. The air felt heavier now, charged with the weight of the soldier's revelation.